Today we are building a rolling island table. A customer reached out wanting something simple with plenty of storage on the bottom and large tabletop for serving food and prep. First thing first, I went shopping for materials. I picked up all the lumber at Lowe's and everything needed to complete this table. Here are all the tools I used to build this table. Next, I needed to figure out what we were building in terms of height, width, and depth. I wanted the overall height to be the height of the standard kitchen countertop. I started by sketching the table's blueprint on a piece of paper, and this is what I came up with. Here's our table and overall dimensions. The height of our table is 36 inches from floor to the top of the counter. The length of the table is 96 inches and the width is 50 inches. Because our countertop will be sitting 1.5 inches past the outside of the legs, our frame will be 3 inches smaller on both sides. The length is 93 inches and the width is 47 inches. Take note that these dimensions are from outside to outside of the 4x4 legs. These dimensions are for both of the frames, bottom and the top. One is for the counter and one is for the shelf. Length is 90 inches and the width is 44 inches. Take note that the plywood on the bottom shelf sticks out past the subframe to give it an overhang lip. Width is 45.5 inches and the length is 91.5 inches. Next, I cut all the lumber and prepped it for this build. I wanted to notch everything so the frame would sit inside the legs instead of being attached to the outside of the legs. And since my 4x4 legs are 3.5 inches wide and the upper and the lower frame are 1.5 inches thick, that still left me with 2 inches of material. So it made perfect sense to notch the legs. This way the table is way stronger than just screwing everything to the outside of the leg. To cut all the 4x4s and to notch them, I used this skill saw first. Then I finished the cuts with the Sawzall where the blade couldn't reach. And the multi-tool also helped and cleaned up a lot of areas, especially the inside corners. By the way, I totally understand that I could use much professional tools for these projects. I know people are probably going to comment, say, why am I not using a chop saw to cut all my lumber, and the 4x4s would make my life so much easier. I totally understand. But from the beginning stages of construction, not everyone has fancy schmancy tools. So on a lot of my builds, I try my best to use tools that are as simple and generic as possible so you can see that you can do this too. However, there are tools that you will absolutely need, and you'll see which ones I'm talking about later on in the build. By the way, I don't know if you picked it up yet, but I always like to clean up and prep the area for the next step. Next step is frame assembly. For the butcher block countertop frame, I use 2x4s. Because the butcher block isn't overly wide or as heavy as some other products, and 2x4s are more than strong enough to support the weight. I ran 2x4s on each side and added 2 in the middle, and in my opinion, this is more than enough to support the load. Make sure you pre-drill all the screw holes so your boards don't crack on you. For the assembly of the frame, I use liquid nails and T25 Torx screws. For the bottom frame, I use 2x6s since it's heavier and the appliances would be sitting on the lower shelf. The bottom frame is the same width and length as the top frame, just built with 2x6s instead of 2x4s. But I probably could have gotten away with using 2x4 frame everywhere, but for peace of mind, I did 2x6s on the bottom. As you can see on these 2x6 supports, I'm using a way heavier gauge screws with a large washer. And the reason for this is that these will be covered by the table legs, so they will be exposed and visible. You want to make sure you measure the proper distance between each screw, pre-drill the holes, and then fasten everything so it looks clean and professional. Next, I sanded all the frames before final assembly. This makes cleanup much easier later. I sanded off the factory labels on the lumber. Some of the boards had minor mold stains and dark spots since it was clearance wood, so I sanded those spots off completely. You might ask, why buy clearance lumber? The answer is, I chose clearance lumber to help save the customer money on this build and also stay on their budget. One tool I really enjoyed using was a new multi-tool sanding attachment designed for tight spaces and inside corner. It's a triangle shape and it was absolutely worth it. Without it, sanding those tight interior corners would have been almost impossible. Before assembly, make sure to dry fit everything. I had to sand a few legs a bit more to get a tight and a clean fit. Next, I started to assemble the 4x4 notch legs to the 2x6 base frame. I measured carefully so the screws landed in the center of the 4x4 post, and I did pre-drill all the holes and use T30 lac screws with liquid nails. Some of the screws from the frame assembly were in the way when installing the legs, as you can see in the video. So I had to shift a few screws over, otherwise my big legs would actually hit them. This is why pre-drilling really helps, keeps the boards from cracking, and you can see where your screw is going to land underneath. And by the way, make sure you do this before putting the liquid nail on. Not that I did that before. I don't know if I mentioned this already, but make sure you use a lot of liquid nail. I also use a router to round over the bottom edges of the legs where the wheels will mount later. I wanted to match the roundness of the factory wood, so I routed all my cuts to match the factory edges. By the way, this step isn't required, but I wanted the bottom of the legs to match the factory edges so it looked clean and uniform. Next, I installed the wheels and I pre-drilled the holes and used T20 screws with large washer head. The wheels that you see me using in the video are rotating 360-degree wheels. I did use a few wheels that have brakes on them to lock the table in place so it doesn't move around. Then I moved on to the bottom plywood shelf. I wanted the plywood to stick out about 3/4 of an inch, so I had to notch it around each leg so it could slide down between the frame and the post as one solid piece. And you can see my dimensions of the plywood and the whole table earlier on in the video. I would highly recommend putting masking tape on where your cuts are going to be located, so when you start cutting and using a saw, it doesn't chip out the edges. I rounded the plywood edges so they weren't sharp, sanded everything smooth, and made sure nothing could chip later. As you can see in the video, I'm loosening some of the screws. The fit was very tight, so I had to loosen some of the leg screws. I slid down the plywood into its place, then I retightened all the screws that I have loosened. Once the bottom shelf was installed, I added the top frame for the butcher block. This process is similar to the bottom frame. Pre-drill, screw it in, and keep everything square. And at this part of the build, I did leave everything overnight to dry and cure before putting the stain on. It's the next day and I'm ready for stain. Staining was pretty simple. I used a dark walnut stain to match a customer's kitchen cabinet. I applied it using a stage sponge and wiped off any excess with the rag until I got the color I wanted. I stained the plywood shelf as well so everything matched. Honestly, I really like how this turned out. The wood grain really pops and it looks great. Next, I started working on the butcher's block. I rounded over the bottom edges before gluing the slabs together, since it's much easier to do this while everything is separated. To glue the slabs together, you're gonna need this tool. It's called a biscuit joiner. I cut matching slots in both of the slabs, spacing the biscuits every 4 inches. Don't rush this step, make sure your measurements are correct on both of the slabs. Don't forget to apply wood glue, inserting your biscuits into the slots. You're also going to need long clamps. I definitely didn't have any, so I had to go and buy some for this build. I mixed the sawdust from the cuts with the glue and filled the seam with it, so that after sanding, it would blend in naturally and almost be invisible. I measured all sides to make sure I have 1.5 inch overhang. After checking everything, I temporarily secured the butcher block with L brackets to hold it in place while sanding and finishing the table. Afterwards, I sanded my glued seam, and honestly, I'm really happy how it turned out. I rounded over the butcher block edges with my router. The bullnose turned out great and actually ties perfectly with the rest of the table. After multiple sanding passes up to 300 grit, I applied polyurethane. I used 3 coats on the butcher block and 1 coat on the rest of the table. This table is going to see a lot of use, so I definitely wanted it to be durable and long lasting, and I think we did a pretty good job with that. I did have to sand lightly between the coats to remove bubbles and imperfections. And as always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe, it really helps the channel. And here's the final product. Thanks for watching, guys. See you guys next time.